What's up, everyone, and welcome to ClearTalk. So, in this video, we're going to be looking at the questions around dictatorships and authoritarian figures, and we're going to be looking at a video from a history professor. Her name is Ruth Ben Ghiat, and she studies authoritarianism and stuff. And I've seen this video, and I thought it was very quite informational, and so I wanted to go through it with you. It is like 30 minutes. This video might be a little long because I might do some stops here and there to talk about certain things for a second, but I have been trying to like shorten my videos as much as I can, and I will continue to do that to try to be a little bit quicker with them and a little bit so that they aren't so drawn out. But every now and then I will do something like this that'll be a little bit of a longer video. So stick with me though. If you don't like the short long videos, that's fine. I understand that. But if you've got the time and you want to chill with me and listen to something or whatever and go over something, then thank you, welcome, and uh, it's gonna be. I'll try to make it as fun as possible. Um, but thank you very much for joining me. And everything's there on the screen if you want to connect to other channels and whatnot. So yeah, you know what to do. Do the damn thing, and let's get to it. All right. So here she is. Let's hear what she has to say. She basically is like taking questions from viewers, I guess, or whatnot, and just trying to answer these questions. So and it's just kind of a back and forth like that, like a Q&A of sorts. Okay, sorry, I realized that the sound was not not running. Okay, here we go. All right.
I'm Professor Ruth Ben Ghiat. I study authoritarianism. Let's answer some questions from the internet. This is tech support dictators. At System Kumar 999 asks, bro, WTF is fascism? Fascism is a one-party state, classically, with an all-powerful dictator at its head, meaning no more separation of powers, no independent judiciary. Mussolini in the 1920s coined the term fascism. He also said everything in the state, nothing outside the state. So the state reaches into areas that in democracies, the state has no place. There's no more trade unions except the state unions. Employers and employees were in the same union, and that tells you what kind of union it was. Fascism is also classically expansionist. The conquest of territory, imperialism, is intrinsic to fascism. There is no sense of fascism without violence. Fascists truly believe, whether it's Hitler or Francisco Franco in Spain or Mussolini, that violence is the way you change the world. They declare one category of person as an enemy. It could be a racial enemy, as in Nazi Germany. It could be a political enemy, as it was in Italian fascism and for Francisco Franco in Spain. But that enemy must be exterminated. So the state organizes itself around the practice of violence. And
What I do like about what talks about here in this video, she gives many like examples of different leaders in the past and even some presently that are have done these types of actions and stuff or are trying to do them or whatever the case, and she really kind of ties it all together. And you can start to see as she explains things like where we actually sit, like in America, potentially, like what we are sitting in or what we are observing, what we are seeing happening before our eyes, and how this is very much like a, kind of a repeat of things that have previously happened. Um, uh, or this, the states, like, history doesn't repeat itself, but it actually like stays in the same rhythm or whatever. Anyways, something like whatever. You'll see that as she brings this together.
regular people are trained to become vigilant and informers and use violence themselves. So violence is at the very core of fascism.
And this is something that I didn't like when I first went through this. She threw these up real quick, but they're really quick and immediately go down as she continues to the next subject or the next part of the video. I thought maybe I would actually take a second to read this out. Fascism is one party state with a dictator at its head, meaning no separation of powers, no independent judiciary. Imperialism is eccentric to fascism, and violence is at the core of fascism. They declare one category of person as an enemy that must be exterminated. So, like, if you can you think of somebody right now that is being categorized as an enemy and must be exterminated or removed, done away with? Think about it.
Malice Liddell asks, why is Putin shirtless in so many of his pictures? Putin takes up where Mussolini left off in using his body as an emblem of strength. Mussolini stripped off his shirt. He was the first leader ever to do that on camera. And that stood for Italy's strength and dynamism and modernity. This idea of the dictator being the man everyone should look up to is very old. It goes back to the fascist years. This is a period cartoon making fun of Hitler. Goebbels, his propaganda minister, was depicting him as a kind of demigod. Dictators and authoritarians pose as the macho men, but they also create a climate in their countries of a kind of lawless masculinity that says that a real man should be able to have anyone and anything he wants without asking for consent. And so Berlusconi created such an atmosphere in Italy of misogyny that the United Nations issued a special report after he had been in and out of power for a decade, saying that there was grave risk to Italy's women because of the rise in domestic violence and hate crimes against women.
Okay, sorry, I had to answer a phone call. Back up right quick.
What defines a dictator? It comes from the
Nope, back up a little bit before that. Here we go.
rise in domestic violence and hate crimes against women.
All right. Putin makes up where Mussolini left off to, I guess it's basically a summary of what she's saying. Putin takes up where Mussolini left off in using his body as an emblem of strength. Dictators and authoritarians pose as macho men that create a climate of a kind of lawless masculinity that says a real man should be able to have anyone and anything he wants without consent. So, there again, can you think of things or anyone right now that tries to create a climate of lawlessness, um, macho man, and thinks he can have anyone or anything he wants without any kind of consent? Just think about that.
The Bang asks, what defines a dictator? It comes from the verb to dictate. That gives us a clue. So a dictator is somebody who wants to get his way, doesn't care about public welfare, often is very, very corrupt, steals from the people, manipulates people through propaganda. They don't agree with the separation of powers, so the executive power becomes overwhelming in a dictatorship. A dictator is a leader who wants absolute power, someone who does not want his authority to be checked by any institution. And so he proceeds to take those institutions apart, to void them of all people who are not loyalists, to create his state in his own image and make everything be about him.
So, a dictator seeks absolute power, disregards public welfare, and is often corrupt, stealing from the people and using propaganda. They reject checks on authority, purge institutions of non loyalists, and reshape the state in their image, making everything about him. Or her, I guess you could say. But most of the time, this is macho man thing. So, again, I'm posed the question: who right now do you looks like this that seeks absolute power, disregards public welfare, is corrupt, stealing from the people, using propaganda, purging institutions, non of loyalists, reshaping the state in their image, constantly wanting everybody to agree with them and nobody else? Just think about it.
At Angel Uma 5 asks, dictatorship, authoritarianism, autocracy. Are the three forms of governance really different? Authoritarianism is a political system that often is dictatorship. You can have civilian dictatorships like the fascist dictatorships. You can have military dictatorships. Nowadays, some of the authoritarian leaders don't correspond to the one-party dictators of earlier times, like Mao or Hitler or Stalin. Autocracy is another name for the political system of authoritarianism. We have democracies where you have voting rights and the will of the people translates into the leadership, and autocracies where the leader does their best to stay in power no matter what the people think.
Okay, so authoritarianism, often a dictatorship, either civilian or military. Autocracy is another name for the political system of authoritarianism. In democracies, leadership reflects the people's will, and autocracies, leaders cling to power regardless of what the people think. So, question posed. Who, right now, is trying to cling to power regardless of what people think?
Kozlowski from Reddit asks, how do dictators maintain power when it seems that most of the country is against them? Dictators use the authoritarian playbook. The playbook is, while you're running for office, while you're building up your power, you want to discredit journalists. You want to call them fake news or vermin or communists. And authoritarians do this because if evidence of their corruption comes out or their violent acts, they need the public to not believe the press, to think the press is lying. So there is no other voice telling the truth. The truth is gone. The Nazi term was the lying press. Today we talk about fake news. Many dictators use what today in Russia is called the fire hose of falsehood. This is a high volume of lies, half-truths, conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories are as old as propaganda. The fact the Jews were supposed to be controlling the globe, that was a fascist conspiracy theory. Dictators also maintain power by creating an atmosphere of terror, of intimidation, whether it's physical violence against enemies of the state, or today they harass people with lawsuits, with smear campaigns. They try and ruin you because the goal is to get you to self-censor. Then you're doing the dictator's work for him. Then you're doing the dictator's work for him.
So, dictators use the authoritarian playbook, discrediting journalists so corruption goes unbelieved, using a fire hose of falsehood to spread lies and ruling by fear through violence, lawsuits, and smear campaigns. The goal is self-censorship, so you do the dictator's work for him. So I'll pose the question again. Who appears to do these things, discrediting journalists and news stations and whatnot, spreading lies, rules by fear and violence, lawsuits, smear campaigns, talking about how horrible they are, stupid. Also, you will self-censor.
AVJ164B from Reddit asks, what are the differences between a fascist dictatorship and a communist dictatorship? They do many, many things in common. They have an all-powerful leader with a personality cult. They use propaganda. The difference is in who the target is. So fascists go after leftists. And although National Socialism and Italian fascism took originally at their very beginnings from the left, as soon as they constituted into parties, their main enemy was the left. The most consistent targets of Nazism and fascism were communists and socialists. So fascist dictatorships are anti-communist. Obviously, that's one huge difference from communist dictatorship. There, the targets, the enemies are counter-revolutionaries, anyone who's going to put the march of the revolution into jeopardy. And so Mao killed millions and millions of people, justifying it as getting rid of counter-revolutionaries.
So they have many things in common. They have an all-powerful leader with a personality cult and use propaganda. The difference is who they target. Fascists go after leftists, communists target counter-revolutionaries. Mao killed millions of people using this as justification. So, um, yeah, how do we, who is constantly, who do we see as far as our country goes? Who is being targeted? Is it leftists being targeted? Is it counter revolutionaries being targeted? Let me know.
Jay Anderson asks, what are the most common personality traits tyrants and dictators possess? They are narcissists, meaning they care only about themselves. Dictators attract attention and adulation because they tend to be very charismatic. So they're very good performers. They're very good orators. They will do anything to preserve their power. For example, Benito Mussolini, the first fascist dictator, in 1924, he had his main political opponent killed. And in order to escape an investigation, he declared dictatorship. Dictators tend to be paranoid. They construct something called the inner sanctum. And this is an inner circle of advisors. And very common is that it includes family members. There's a whole history of sons-in-law being given important positions, from Benito Mussolini, the fascist, who had his son-in-law as foreign minister. Pinochet used his son-in-laws and put them at the head of the privatization agencies, so they made a lot of money. They also end up in this kind of cocoon where they start to believe their own propaganda and stop making good decisions. Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022 without consulting his military or his economic specialists adequately. And so the military had huge losses at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. More generals died than since World War II at the beginning, because Putin did not listen to criticism and objective feedback. Dictators don't have any moral code. They will ally with anyone. Think about Hitler, the fascist, allying temporarily with Stalin, the communist. Think about today, Xi Jinping, the communist, allying with Vladimir Putin, the far-right leader. So that old Machiavellian saying, the ends justify the means, perfectly sum up the dictator's personality.
Okay, so they're narcissists. They're very good performers, orators. They will do anything to preserve their power. Dictators tend to be paranoid, which leads them to become very insular. The saying, the ends justify the means, perfectly sums up the dictator's personalities. So, when we think about, in the United States right now, do we have somebody who, you know, presents themselves like a narcissist, good performer, do anything to preserve their power, being kind of even paranoid at times, creating a insular like cabinet, the people around them that, they, you know, they only trust. And also connecting themselves with other dictators or other, that may be even sort of opposition to them.
At Volpecule June asks, why do dictators have statues and pictures of themselves all over the countries they oppress? Dictators have giant egos, but their secret is that they're very insecure. The rules of personality cults have not changed for 100 years. You have to be the man of the people. You speak in a plain language. You connect with the people. But you've also got to be the man above all other men, the man who's untouchable, the man who's kind of like a god. So they build statues of themselves to give a sense of this godliness, of this omnipotence. So the statues are their way of saying, I'm going to be here for 1,000 years. So dictators want to be omnipresent. They have so many reminders of themselves in every way, rituals, statues, books, photographs, and they become kind of inescapable. Take the Heil Hitler salute in Nazi Germany. Anytime you went into any social context, you had to perform it. You both used your hand to salute, but you had to say out loud, Heil Hitler. This brought Hitler into the conversation, into every conversation, even though he was not physically present. And what you were doing is saying you were submissive to him and wishing him good health. This corresponds to the desire of the dictator to be everywhere, and people should not have social relations without the dictator being part of them. And that's also why their populations get really sick of them.
So dictators have giant egos. They have to be the man above all men, so they build statues of themselves to give a sense of their godliness and omnipotence. The statues are their way of saying, I'm going to be here for 1,000 years. Dictators want to be omnipresent. So, when we think about the United States again, who is someone who seems to have a giant ego, thinks they are above everyone, um, does like to um, erect things that clearly state who they are and who, it is for. Is even said, they should be added to an existing monuments. Yeah. Who's currently right now even changing the Oval Office, uh, to all gold. Just
Mr. Cornfield asks, how do dictators come to power? They can be appointed, as the classic fascists were. Mussolini was appointed by the king. German elites, politicians brought in Hitler. Nowadays, dictators can come to power initially through elections and then become dictators. For example, Vladimir Putin, when he was put into place, he was backed by the oligarchs. At the beginning, he was not an all-powerful dictator. It takes people years to amass enough power to do that. About 75% of authoritarian regimes in the 20th century were created through coups. A group of soldiers and generals, they just take power. These can be civilian coups or military coups, but the point is that they impose themselves on power forcibly.
So they can be appointed as the classic fascists were. Today, they more commonly come into power through elections and then later become dictators like Putin. Also, about 75% of authoritarian regimes in the 20th century were created through civilian or military coups. So, yeah. It's pretty self-explanatory.
At George Forrester 17 asks, WTF is a, quote, self-coup d'etat. A self-coup is a variety of coup when the leader is already in office. Perhaps you are the leader and you've lost an election. Well, you just refuse to leave. That's what Nicolas Maduro did in Venezuela. That's what Donald Trump tried to do through the January 6th insurrection, but in that case, it failed. President Yoon of South Korea declared martial law instead of having to be impeached. In that case, it was promptly dismantled and he is under detention. The same thing happened in Peru in 2022. President Castillo was about to be impeached, so he refused to leave. He tried to have martial law. It was, again, very swiftly taken care of and justice was served. The joke was that President Castillo started his day as president and he ended it as a prisoner. It's very important to find perpetrators of self-coups accountable. This started his day as president and he ended it as a prisoner. It's very important to find perpetrators of self-coups accountable.
So a self-coup is when a leader is in office and wants to stay there. If they lose an election, they refuse to leave. Maduro did this in Venezuela. Trump tried to do this to the January 6th insurrection, which we all know of, and it failed. It's important to find perpetrators of self-coups accountable, which, unfortunately, he did not. And that's why he's back in power.
This next question is from Kai. Did y'all know Hitler tried to overthrow the government during the beer hall putsch in 1923, but failed and was jailed? I did know, and it's important for everybody to know this history now. So Hitler tried to overthrow the government. He was put in jail in 1924. That's where he wrote Mein Kampf. When he came out, he was ranting and raving with his racist diatribes. He was not taken seriously, although several German states did prevent him from speaking publicly because of his hate speech. But then he promised to obey the Constitution to get those bans on his hate speech removed. And he proceeded to build up the Nazi Party over the 1920s. And then the Depression hit and social unrest increased. The left parties increased. And so German elites in 1933 decided to appoint Hitler, who by then was the leader of an increasingly popular party, to get rid of the left for them. So the German elites who brought Hitler into power thought they could control him and use him to get rid of the left. And then the rest was history, where they were not able to contain him and he ended up controlling them.
All right, so Hitler tried to overthrow the government and was jailed. When he was released, he built up the Nazi Party. When the Depression hit and social unrest increased, Germany leaders appointed him, thinking they could control him and use him to destroy the left. He ended up controlling them. So if you think about how, uh, although somebody in power was not jailed, even though he was found guilty of some stuff. He's created built up a party, a specialist party for himself, a group of people that he basically controls. You have elites in the country who are trying to right now use him more than previously to control and destroy the left, who oftentimes talks about how those people are our actual enemies, and not we are not enemies of our towards ourselves. And so they're trying to use him to destroy that argument. It is still in question of whether or not who is actually controlling who, and in the end, who will be controlling who. So
Midwest Mama says many dictatorships criminalize abortion. China, Russia, several others say it's a woman's duty to breed as many children as possible for the state. That's correct, and we can ask why that is throughout history. Dictatorships, even in the case of China, where they had a one-child policy for many years, have now started to reverse this. And dictatorships in particular that have fantasies of national purity, of designing a perfect race, or of having more, as Viktor Orban says, Hungarian babies to combat the number of immigrant babies. All these different reasons are why many dictatorships and authoritarian states encourage the right kind of women to have babies. Along with the political opposition, journalists, LGBTQ people, women have been the enemy of the strongman. And every regime acts to take bodily autonomy away from women, take their agency away, and criminalizing abortion and rolling back or getting rid of reproductive rights is part of that.
So, dictators have always had fantasies of natural purity. They encourage the right kind of women to have babies. Women have always been the enemy of the strong man, and even in every regime acts to take bodily autonomy away from them. Rolling back reproductive rights is part of that. And if we think about, today, things that are going on right now, where, the abrupt removal of immigrants, unless apparently here recently they are white immigrants, because now we're accepting immigrants from South Africa, white immigrants from South Africa. That's okay, but brown and black and immigrants and stuff from Latin American countries or wherever else, we need to get rid of those. Encouraging the right kind of women to have babies. They've tried to push for the $5,000 for to have a baby, like a kind of a payment and incentive for having a baby, to help for the early on whatever costs and stuff of having a baby. That's been proposed. Now granted, that's just in general, because that's just their idea of trying to boost up the population. But like, because the argument is often sometimes that or that our argument is for allowing women to have autonomy is you know you never like the one problem reason why people don't want to have babies right now is that it costs too much. And so their solution to that is, well, then we'll give you money to have a baby. Kind of, kind of, the cost too much thing is, although, very much accurate, that's not the only reason why people don't want um, to have babies, even though it is a large part. But anyway, and, as much as they've tried to roll back reproductive rights and everything, uh, because they want homegrown Americans to have more babies to be able to keep, you know, uh, the machine going, the economical machine going, so that we don't need immigrants to come in, because that's the argument from the left a lot, is that, well, the immigrants are actually helping our economy. Well, they're saying, well, no, we're going to get rid of these immigrants, and the reason why is we're going to give you jobs, and we want you to have babies so that we can have internal, growth for the economy, our own people, making things and whatnot. This is a whole thing. So yeah.
This next question is from Karen. Sake, do Americans want to live in a dictatorship? Many Americans have no idea what dictatorship entails, but have been convinced that democracy is failing them and have seen dictators held up as superior role models. They have been conditioned by the media, by President Trump, to feel that autocrats, that dictators, whether it's Xi Jinping, whether it's Vladimir Putin, are superior brands of leaders. Studies have shown all over the world, about 30% of the population holds authoritarian leanings that are often expressed in parenting styles, in how they think about authority. Are you kind of a mini dictator at home, or are you a collegial collaborative type? These people can get activated if a demagogue comes on the scene. For almost 10 years now, Donald Trump has appealed to certain groups who are more comfortable with authoritarian contexts. He created a big tent for every kind of political extremist, every kind of racist, from people who were Southern racists to neo-Nazis. Those people who already have authoritarian views on the world can be very seduced by a politician who comes and says, I am a strong man. I will decide things for you. I will bring order into society. And it becomes a natural meeting of that kind of person with that kind of leader. And so together, all of this created an environment where many Americans felt that they could see themselves in some kind of political system that's not a democracy.
So many Americans have been convinced democracy is failing them. Trump conditioned them to believe autocrats are superior leaders, like, are the rich and powerful and whatnot. Studies have shown worldwide about 30% of the population holds authoritarian leanings, which we have noted even in here and stuff, that, it's roughly about 30% of the population that seems to, although I would argue that as far as the United States is concerned, that number, I think, is actually dropping. I think there's more and more. I think this is where it was, like around 30% of the population was like hardcore Trump, MAGA. Um, but here recently, we've had polls showing about, like, when asked, which is a very important question, I think, and it's how strongly you think it would be for Trump to do a third term, like staying in power. And I think it was only around 20% or so, 20, 21%, that actually said that they thought that that was um, a good thing. So there is a bit of a shrinking, I think, happening, where people, even those who are, have been gung ho. I think there's a small fraction of them that are starting to be like, wait a minute, although I agree with this, and this, I feel like this might be going a little bit too far, or this might be going a little bit too far. So yeah, I think that number might be potentially breaking as far as domestically. But yeah, about 30% of the population holds authoritarian leanings. These people can be activated by a demagogue. If a demagogue comes onto the scene, and we certainly have seen that. And I thought the interesting part where she brought up about parenting styles is whether or not you were kind of like a mini dictator as a parent, trying to, you know, or like a micromanager kind of, person, or if you're a little bit more of a free, you know, uh, go with the flow, not necessarily a pushover, but just someone who tries to be fair about how, and not hypocritical on how you are parenting your child. Like the whole, it's good for me, but not good for you kind of parental aspect. Versus okay, I don't want to be a hypocrite, so you know, um, this is why this or whatever. You have a little bit more of a dialogue type, like or a little bit more of an understanding, a little bit more of a fair way of judging things, or you know, uh, anyway, parenting style. Thought that was very interesting the way she pulled that.
Shark Boy from Reddit asks, how do dictators actually make their money? The history of dictatorship and the history of corruption are completely entwined. At their extreme, you have something called kleptocracy. That is when it's a state of thieves. An example was Gaddafi in Libya, where the leader and his cronies were stealing from state agencies. They were expropriating private citizens' factories. They were taking over state agencies and funneling the money to Swiss bank accounts. The same thing is true of Putin's Russia, which is a fully formed kleptocracy, where Putin and his cronies kind of plunder, for example, Gazprom, the state energy conglomerate. They take profits out of state agencies. So instead of working for the people, the agency works to fund the dictator. And the money today goes less to Swiss bank accounts than to offshore accounts. For example, Vladimir Putin, after 20 years in power, is now one of the very richest men in the world. So dictators make money in an illegitimate fashion, which is why they use propaganda, violence, repression to make sure that none of their secrets come out.
So, dictatorships and corruption are historically intertwined. When it's a state of thieves like Putin's Russia is called a kleptocracy. Putin plunders state agencies. Instead of serving the people, they fund them. Instead of the agencies serving the people, they fund the government. They fund, Putin and his means. And after 20 years in power, Putin is one of the world's richest men. And you wonder why someone like Donald Trump admires someone like Putin. And we can see how in our recent, who in our recent situation is allowing for rich people to plunder into state agencies and, break them down, rooting out, so-called corruption, fraud, and abuse. But all the while, we find out afterwards they are adding grants and or contracts to their own personal businesses, and therefore making money. They're changing contracts and all that kind of stuff, so that for their own. I mean, just something to think about.
Based Mike Lee writes, name a fascist dictator whose agenda entailed limiting the size, cost, and power of government. Well, Senator Lee, there is one, Augusto Pinochet, the bloody military dictator of Chile who came to power through a US-backed coup and made Chile a laboratory of neoliberal economics, privatizations, deregulations, cutting social services. And at first, this provided a boost to the economy, mostly to giant corporations, including American corporations. But within a few years, it caused bank failures, massive hardship, and people went into debt. And so the long view is that we can think of dictators as always expanding the government and causing a lot of waste and bloat in the process, actually. But even when they cut the size of the government, it doesn't end up well.
So, Pinochet, whatever, Chile's military dictator who took power via a U.S. backed coup, enacted privatization, deregulation, and social services cuts. It briefly boosted big corporations, but soon led to bank failures and hardship. So, even when they cut government size, it doesn't end well. And who right now, um, and the people in charge around him are trying to enact privatization, trying to deregulate. They always talk about deregulating, going after social services, trying to boost big corporations and stuff with tax uh, reductions and everything else, uh, and all these things are causing a chaos and confusion and instability in our markets, and which includes our banks and everything else. And the outlook right now is kind of bleak as far as whether or not we were heading into a recession or anything like that. um and this was all being done to cut out you know cut the government size down and remove fraud and abuse and corruption, waste. Let's think about it.
Johnson Tao says, I don't understand. Why do people support dictators? It can seem strange that people support dictators who take their rights away, because what dictators want you to do is not only betray other people in your communities, you're going to inform on them, you're going to look the other way when your loved ones get taken away by the secret police. They also want you to betray yourself. They want you to lose your moral compass, to self-censor. Dictators are very skilled at posing as saviors, at creating crises or exploiting crises and then posing themselves as the solution. Whether it's an economic crisis or the perception of social unrest, one of the classic dictator narratives for 100 years is that only the authoritarian is going to keep people safe against the threat of immigrants coming across the border. Now, there's a grain of truth always to this, because immigrants too come over the border. But what dictators do is say that immigrants are coming over the border to rape our women, to take our jobs, to dilute our population because they're the wrong skin color and the wrong faith. And so the same excuses for 100 years are used to justify their national purity campaigns. Mussolini used to talk about black, brown, and yellow people, that's his words, coming across the border and having too many babies. These are old narratives, and they work because they make people fearful for their security, for their family, and then the dictator is there to say, I alone can fix.
Dictators are very skilled at exploiting crises and posing themselves as the solution. A classic narrative is that only authoritarians can keep people safe against the threats of immigrants. It works because it makes people fearful, and the dictator says, I alone can fix it. So who does, currently, as far as our country is concerned, is trying to always, everything is an emergency, a national security emergency, is posing a threat to you, and that they are the only solution. That it would have never happened if they were, if they were in office previously or whatever the case, and only they can fix it. And that they are the only ones that can prevent, the threats of the immigrants, people coming here, and alone they can fix it. Just saying.
Snowflake 100% pure masshole says, why is he even having rallies? He's referring to President Trump. US presidents don't have rallies. Dictators have rallies. Hitler had rallies. Authoritarians love adulation, and they love opportunities to perform, because rallies are an occasion where people come out in mass numbers to show their loyalty. And what dictators care about more than anything is people showing loyalty to them on camera. And so that's one reason, whether they're right or left or anti-colonial or imperialist, they all have rallies. Early on, Joseph Goebbels, who later became Hitler's propaganda chief, he realized that Hitler was terrible in a studio. He was wooden. He needed the energy of crowds to come alive. And that's why Goebbels hit on this idea of having rallies nonstop. And that has remained a feature of dictatorship. Think of Mobutu Sese Seko Bosco in the Congo constantly had rallies where he dressed up. His thing was being the leopard. He sat on a throne. These are shows of power and omnipotence.
So U.S. Presidents don't have rallies. Dictators have rallies. Authoritarians love adulation and opportunities to perform, and so they have rallies even when they're not running for office. They want people showing loyalty to them on camera. These are shows of power and omnipotence. So, yeah, who right now clearly loves, adulation, loves people, you know, pouring out to them their love and admiration and everything else. I mean, if you look at uh, committee meetings and things, and how even the people that are surrounding them, the people in the administration, are just constantly like the first thing they have to do when they start to talk about their particular like areas that they are leadership of. Before they even talk about those areas, they have to completely just pour out their, you know, uh, admiration and love for the person, the elephant in the room, so to speak. And this is, and of course the rallies constantly having cheering, and that, and the point is to have it being done on TV so that there is like a record, there is something visual that can be seen, and there's the obsession with the large crowds and the things like that. Like they want that presence to be seen, and that uh, so yeah, think about that.
Here's a question from the political discussion subreddit. Does the internet improve democracy or enhance the potential for dictatorship? The internet is a double-edged tool. It has allowed dissidents who are operating in repressive contexts to have new audiences they would never have had, such as the protesters in 2019 in Moscow, who live streamed on Twitter themselves getting arrested, having millions and millions of views. However, the internet has allowed dictators to centralize and speed up the circulation of their propaganda. Now, this goes back all the way to the beginning of authoritarianism. Smart dictators, savvy dictators, have always known how to take the latest media technology and use it to their advantage. So Mussolini used newsreels, and he was a great performer. Hitler had that crazy ranting voice, so he was very effective with radio. Modi of India, when he first ran for office, and he's the most followed leader on Instagram in the world right now, he used holograms so he could be in 100 different cities at the same time. Up through Bolsonaro in Brazil and Trump, who used social media very, very effectively. So the internet is a tool like other tools before it. However, the internet has the ability to hugely increase the volume of propaganda and the circulation of propaganda.
Yes, that's very much is true. The internet is a double-edged tool. It has allowed dissidents um, who are operating in a repressive content to have new audiences they would not, never have had. But it also allowed dictators to centralize and speed up the circulation of the propaganda. So, yes, it is true that um, the internet has its goods and bads. That's like self-explanatory. It's good for those like myself first, or if people like me, or people that are for doing rally or not rallies, protests and things like that, to share things that are going on, to get the word around, to see the backlash, to see that and that's important, because on the other flip side of that, you have the use of the internet currently with True Social and X and everything else, where people like Trump and others are use those avenues to spread their propaganda, to lie, to even apparently dictate policy and everything else, um, and to try to control the narrative and try to control their followers and people, and and stating that and that keeping that bubble there for them. Um, and so it's good for, even on the flip side of that, for those who are doing the protests and whatnot, for that to be seen, where when someone like Trump states that things are a certain way, and things the reality is a certain thing that they want to dictate, but then on the flip side of that, we see that that may not actually be the case when things are discussed or things are protested against or whatever that completely oppose what said leader is, dictating over here in this bubble. So, it is a double-edged sword. And it really comes down to who can work it better as to who will succeed in that avenue. So that's the reason why we try and continue to try.
At E. Harding 2000 asks, is Orban a fascist? Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, has fascist qualities, but today, in the 21st century, fascism looks different. You have elections, you keep them going, but you manipulate the system by control of the media, by control of the judiciary and the election apparatus to make sure that the election goes out your way. Orban has become a hero to the new right because he has perfected what we call electoral autocracy. You keep elections going, but you find ways to get the results that you need. So that's different from old school fascism. Orban has gotten his cronies to buy important media properties. So it's indirect control of the media. And you control the electoral system. You hollow out the institutions so that everybody's loyal to you. So these are things that go back to fascism, but today they take place within a multi-party state. One continuity of Orban with classic fascism is trying to grow the population, but only some people are encouraged to have babies, white Christians. Immigrants are not encouraged to have babies. Indeed, he's trying to get rid of immigrants and have them deported. Another continuity is homophobia. LGBTQ people have been legislated bureaucratically out of existence, and that goes back to fascism. Anybody who does not fit those roles of what they call the natural family, one man, one woman, both straight, does not have a future in Hungary.
So yeah, Orban has fascist qualities, but 21st century fascism looks different. You have elections, but you manipulate the system by controlling the media, the judiciary, and the election apparatus to make sure that the elections go your way. So that's different from old school fascism. I mean, you think about today, with some of the things that have been implemented and changed, the constant talk about elections and the elections being, proper or being done lawfully, but then we turn around and they're trying to make it to where you have to have some sort of legal document like a birth certificate or something like that to vote in future elections. So therefore now a license or whatnot, or just a ID card is not enough. It's not legitimate enough. It has to be a document that shows like actual citizen proof, uh, and it has to even match up name and whatnot. So that's the question right now, is whether or not this is going to affect like millions of women in the country, where that have married, and typically you take your husband's name, and that's like legally changed. And if those things don't match up, with your birth certificate, your driver's license, everything, then that throws you out of being able um, to vote. So there, and this is something that certainly needs to be watched and paid attention to. Uh, and like I said, they're trying to control the media. They're trying to control the judiciary, and along with the school systems and everything else. They're trying to change them to where they work for them and loyal to them. And if you're not loyal to them, then you are against them, and you're, wrong and everything else. You're a bad person, whatnot. Not credible. So this is all the kinds of things that are kind of going on right now. That's 21st century fascism.
At Onzi XS says, Pinochet was evil, but he made Chile what it is today. Benevolent dictator? I study dictators. I do not believe any dictator is benevolent because the definition of a dictator is someone who represses the popular will. There's no voting in a classic dictatorship. There's no free press. If you are an opponent of the regime, you will be sent to jail or killed. That's not, to me, the definition of benevolence.
So I study dictators. The definition of a dictator is someone who represses the popular will. There's no voting in a classic dictatorship. There's no free press. If you are an opponent of the regime, you'll be sent to jail or killed. To me, that's not definition of benevolence. Self-explanatory.
At Tyler E. Harris asks, honest question, but why do dictators even bother to hold elections? They're just going to rig anyway. Today, dictators keep elections going, and so we often call them authoritarians rather than dictators, but they rig the system through colonizing the media so the opposition's message can't get there. They'll put a prominent opponent under house arrest. That's what Vladimir Putin did with Alexei Navalny, who was extremely popular. He sent him to jail, so he couldn't be a candidate. So the new system is called electoral autocracy. You hold elections, but you use all these tricks to make sure that they're not free and fair elections. You can even, once you feel you've amassed enough power, hold an election and then just refuse to recognize the results if you have lost. And we have several examples of that recently. The biggest one in Venezuela, still playing out today. Maduro, who lost an election to the opposition, refused to leave office. In 2023, we had Bolsonaro trying to have a coup because he was claiming he actually won the election when he lost. And in the United States, Donald Trump claimed that he won the 2020 election when he did not.
So, modern dictators maintain elections. This is why we call them authoritarians. So, it's technically not, I guess, accurate to call them a dictator because they actually do hold elections. But the idea is to, manipulate and rig the system to where you have control of those elections. And then if all else fails, you just completely reject those results. And we've seen this. This has happened already, like she had talked about with Trump, where in 2020 he completely ignored, and even to today he still claims that he did not lose that election. So.
Epic Thundercat says, at what point do we start calling what Elon Musk is doing inside our government a coup? As a historian of coups, I consider this to be a situation that merits the word coup. So coups happen when people inside state institutions go rogue. This is different. This is unprecedented. A private citizen, the richest man in the world, has a group of 19, 20-year-old coders who have come in as shock troops and are taking citizens' data and closing down entire government agencies. When we think of traditional coups, often perpetrated by the military, you have foot soldiers who do the work of closing off the buildings, of making sure that the actual government, the old government they're trying to overthrow, can no longer get in. What we have here is a kind of digital paramilitaries, a group of people who have taken over and they've captured the data, they've captured the government buildings. They were sleeping there 24/7, and elected officials could not come in. When our own elected officials are not allowed to enter into government buildings because someone else is preventing them who has not been elected or officially in charge of any government agency, that qualifies as a coup.
So, yeah. As a historian of coups, this situation merits the word coup. When our own elected officials are not allowed to enter in government buildings because they're blocked by someone who has not been elected or official in charge of an agency that qualifies as a coup, which is correct. I mean, that's exactly what Elon Musk and his crew were doing. They were taking over agencies. They were stripping data. They were taking information without anyone's knowing what they were doing and what they were accessing. Don't know exactly what they did access or where that information went. They were preventing government officials, like senators and stuff, from getting into buildings, because they were trying to find out what they were doing. So yes, that in itself is definitely a coup.
Pat Berry, despondent American, asks, how do the oligarchs who help authoritarians come into power fare after the dictator has what he wants? Does he ever turn on them? Oligarchs are immensely wealthy and powerful individuals who can help to change the political environment by putting certain candidates in office. This was the case with Putin. He was chosen to run for president in 2000 by oligarchs. One of the pillars of authoritarianism is what's called authoritarian bargains. These are deals that leaders make with powerful people. They could be oligarchs in the media area, in finance and business. They could also be faith leaders. Some faith leaders are so powerful to be almost like oligarchs. And so these people team up. The dictator needs these people to legitimate them, to tell the rest of the population, because they're so influential, that this guy is actually okay. He may be violent, but he's our guy. The problem with this is inevitably, when the dictator has seen that the oligarch has outlived his usefulness, they will throw them under the bus. Early oligarchs who brought Putin to power, he tried to then colonize or seize their assets. And if they didn't agree to give him their assets, he tried to jail them or they had to go into exile. There's been something called sudden Russian death syndrome, where many, many powerful elites connected with the energy industry have fallen out of windows or gone into the hospital and never emerged again because Putin is cleaning house.
So, yeah.
Energy industry have fallen out of windows or gone into the hospital and never emerged again because Putin is cleaning house.
So oligarchs are immensely wealthy and influential people who can shape politics by backing candidates, as they did with Putin in 2000. Authoritarians bargain elites um, in media, business, and faith, but when oligarchs outlive their use, they're exiled, jailed, or mysteriously killed. Which is, something that has definitely been going on here with, someone like Elon Musk and whatnot, as far as, using them, backing the candidate, using them to, control businesses and agencies, control media like X and whatnot. Um, and, but granted, we currently have not at the point where these people have outlived themselves or their use quite yet. So, um, when could it possibly be they be turned on? I guess that's yet to be seen.
House. Tanvir Hassan asks, how can a dictator be good for a nation? Dictators certainly want to be seen as being good for the nation. And many people become fans of dictators because dictators are into infrastructure. They have huge egos. They want to be identified with grandiose public works. Mussolini built sports stadiums. He built miles of railroads, and the myth was that he made the trains run on time. Hitler built the Autobahn, the high-speed highways. Today in Turkey, Erdogan has very large construction projects such as the Istanbul Canal. And so there's a sense of modernity and things happening. The problem is when you don't have a free press, nobody can be tracking with accurate statistics how these big public works are affecting the economy and what kind of corruption is happening behind the scenes. So dictators can attract a lot of support by people who fall for the appearances. Look, he's doing things. Other people are not doing things. The dictator gets things done. However, it's only later that the economic and social outcome of those big projects comes to light.
Dictators have huge egos and want to be identified with grandiose public works. Mussolini built sports stadiums. Hitler built the Autobahn. Dictators can attract support by people who fall for appearances. It's only later that the economic and social outcomes come to light. So, yeah. As we, Trump in the first term, his big thing was building the wall. He wanted to build the wall, make a big thing out of the. I feel like that was like his big thing then. Now, not so sure exactly outside of of. I'm not so sure outside of like, bringing business and stuff back to the country, if they, to have that imagery of factories and stuff being built again or whatnot. Or, I guess you could potentially argue the idea behind Gaza that he's thrown out there, that being some sort of, a building project that he could see himself, trying to make grandiose and whatnot. Um, but I mean, uh, like I said, these things, the economic strife and social things that happen, yeah, they will come to life, to light, and all these things like the tariffs and whatnot. I mean, these grandiose things that they are, or immigrants, whatnot. I mean, these are not building uh, public works per se, but these things will have a huge impact on economic and social outcomes.
Right. Alex Gretsch asks, why do dictators love Trump? We know that Trump loves dictators. He even has talked about exchanging love letters with the leader of North Korea, not someone you would often think of as a particularly sentimental type. Do dictators love Trump? That's unclear. Dictators are transactional. They use each other. If dictators are loving Trump at the moment, it's because they think that he can be an ally, that they can get something from him. If we take as the example Vladimir Putin, he and Trump have a good relationship, and yet he allows Trump to be mocked on Russian television as a useful fool. So this is an example of them using each other, which is what dictators know how to do beautifully.
So dictators are transactional. They use each other. If dictators love Trump, it's because they think that he is an ally or they can get something from him. For example, Putin and Trump have a good relationship. Yet Putin allows Trump to be mocked on Russian television as youthful. So yeah, dictators are very transactional. I mean, and you can see that type of character in Trump. Everything that he does is transactional. Everything that he has done is transactional. It's what he can get out of somebody else. So, and that's the idea. He loves dictators, and he has shown that over and over again. He places himself in an ally to dictators over people that are actually our allies. So we've talked about this previously. Um, so yeah, everybody's a useful tool, right? So, or a useful fool. um, yeah.
At Eric E. Warren asks, why do dictators always blame media, opposition, foreign countries, and terror groups? Dictators are expert at creating a sense of existential dread. So it's not just polarization. We don't agree, but we're in the same framework. We agree to disagree. They go for what I call survivalism. It's me or you, and only one of us is going to survive. This is what the Nazis did with the Jews. This is what racists everywhere do with non-white peoples. They create a sense of existential dread that this group must be attacked, and sometimes, in the case of genocide, must be removed from the face of the earth in order for our country to have peace and safety. Often, the enemy is a foreign country, and there's a long history of dictators saying that their countries have been victimized. Mussolini talked about Italy as victimized by more powerful countries, democracies, up to Xi Jinping, who has a long history of talking about Chinese victimization by the West, or Vladimir Putin, Russia's victimization by the West. And so these are very powerful narratives that can justify foreign invasion. The dictator says, we've been victimized. It's time for us to protect ourselves by getting more territory. Here's
Ooh, that one went fast.
it's time for us to protect ourselves by getting more territory.
So dictators are experts at making groups enemies, foreign or domestic. They know in order to have bonds between them and the people, you need an enemy. The dictators are especially good at creating a sense of existential dread. It's me or you, and only one of us can survive. And you think about, like, for right now, someone who is throwing tariffs out there and trying to make everybody an enemy, right? That we are the victim, our country is the victim of everybody taking advantage of us, that kind of thing. When we clearly are the largest economy in the world, and I, I'm pretty sure that we've been the one taking advantage of others. So, just a thought.
territory. Here's a question from Magic. Is Xi Jinping a dictator? Not only is Xi Jinping a dictator, the communist system only permits dictators, but Xi Jinping is becoming more of a dictator.
That's one. I stopped this one early. That's one section there that I don't completely agree with, or where she says communism only uh, only brings about dictators. I don't completely agree with that.
Magic. Is Xi Jinping a dictator? Not only is Xi Jinping a dictator, the communist system only permits
Like its communist system only permits dictators. That I don't completely agree with. But either way. All right.
It's dictators. But Xi Jinping is becoming more of a dictator. This is one way we can track how dictatorship expands. Is your personality cult becoming more prominent? Check. Xi Jinping's cult is becoming more prominent. Are you trying to rehabilitate past dictators to kind of bolster your own glory? Check. Xi Jinping is talking a lot about Mao and styling himself as the inheritor of Mao.
So not only is she a dictator, he's becoming more of a dictator. This is one way that you can track how dictators expand. His personality cult is becoming more prominent, and he's trying to rehabilitate past dictators to bolster his own glory, styling himself as an inferior, inheritor of Mao. So, yeah, that's what they do. Yes, I think that you could even look at this as saying, like, with the tariffs, how Trump kind of goes back to McKinley and tries to bolster that whole time as the golden age and how we're in a new golden age and all that. I think this is just a way of bolstering to some degree his own like glory in the same kind of similar way to expand his um, uh, prominence in the MAGA cult and whatnot. So I think we got just one more little section here, almost done. So let's go.
Now, here's a question from Peter Quince. Why do dictators and wannabe dictators always want more land? That's kind of in the nature of being the dictator. You always want more power. You always want more control. You also want more assets. You want more natural resources to exploit if you're corrupt. The same narratives get put forth over and over again. Narratives of national purity. So, for example, the Nazis, it wasn't enough to have conquest of Germans. You had to go into Austria because there are people. Or you have these myths of national unification, and that's being used right now by Xi Jinping, a communist, for Taiwan, that Taiwan must be China because it needs to be reunified as though it was part of China to begin with. The same with Putin and Ukraine, that they called the conquest of Ukraine a reunification. So these are imperialist justifying narratives, and dictators use them over and over again. So it's no surprise to find President Trump, a man of authoritarian leanings, having come back to power and becoming an imperialist, talking about Canada becoming the 51st American state, talking about taking control of Greenland.
Exactly. It's in a dictator's nature, always wanting more power, control, assets, natural resources, and exploit if you're corrupt. It's no surprise that President Trump, a man of authoritarian leanings, is talking about taking over Canada as a 51st state and taking control of Greenland and stuff like that, and all the different other areas he wants to imperialize, like like Gaza and things like taking over all these different things, changing the name of the Gulf, all these different things. I mean, this is just that's the nature of someone who wants ultimate power. They also need that ultimate assets. And it kind of also throws back to the idea of wanting to expand things or wanting some grandiose idea, which is something I'm going to talk about in another video about the grander North America uh, idea and you know in other words, not only him wanting to actually look like he expanded our land, and made America greater by taking in Canada, taking in Mexico, taking in Greenland, and so now we're not just like this United States and stuff. We are this United States land, this massive country of and land has always been just sort of this vision of strength and power. The larger your empire is, the better and stronger you are. So yeah.
So those are all the questions for today. Thank you for watching.
So yeah, that I thought that was a very intuitive video, going over all these different thoughts and questions of these different aspects of authoritarianism, dictatorship, and how they look different in different ways depending upon who is in power, the systems that they're under, who's the target, all those different things. I thought it was a great video, and she broke it down pretty well. But like I said, in all of those different things, when you start applying them and thinking about them in our own situation right now, it gets harder and harder and harder to deny um, or defend actions that are being taken by Trump and his regime of people. That uh, when you it just makes it harder. It just you start to look at it and you start to break it down, connect it to all these different people in the past and even some in the present, and seeing their similarities in actions and how they've gone about, taking control of this, taking control of that, manipulating this, manipulating that, corrupting this, corrupting that, using this, using that. I mean, all these different things, and you start to, come to the realization that this is very much, um, even if dictator in the classic fashion doesn't technically represent what Trump is doing, authoritarianism certainly does, especially the um, autocratic kleptocracy type oligarchy, control like authoritarianism. And also the question there still resides, though: how long is Trump? Is he the type of person, authoritarian, who has to have that full control? Um, in other words, to the point that he even starts to backstab those that he's used to get there. We've seen him backstab people in the past, throw people in the bus and whatnot, but like the big people that are getting them, like the Elon Musks of the world and stuff like that. Like, at what point, if we start to see him actually throw him under the bus and backstab him, is that going to be his move in actually taking the full step into like power? And I think that's something to pay attention to and watch, and also being aware of all these other things that are happening and going on. That you know, hopefully, this video and the things that she discussed, for someone who is out, who may be watching, that is a supporter and has been a supporter, and even though you may have seen some things and you go, man, that's kind of tough, I'm not so sure we should be doing that, but I mean, I agree with you here, so I'm going to overlook that, or I'm going to overlook that because I agree with you on that or that. Like, you've got to hold to your to a you've got to find a way to hold to a standard. That there's got to be some sort of line that's crossed, and no matter how much you might like a person, or think you like a person, or think that you like something that person supposedly represents, or supposedly is claiming they are fighting for, to come to the realization that maybe, just maybe, they're not all they appear to be, and that they are actually out for other ends to other means, and you've just fallen victim to that. So let me know in the comments what you think about the video, about things that were discussed here, even if it's specific, like, questions or specific, parts of it. Do you think it was a good video? Do you think it wasn't? I mean, yes, there was, clearly a leaning in the video. I admit that, but it was painting and drawing out though through examples in history and other people, you know, um, of power, how the connections can be made there, and the connections are so, in many cases, vivid that um, it should at least throw up some concern. So let me know what you think. And yes, I know this was another long video. I told you it was. So thank you if you did stick to this and steer here with me. You are amazing. And hell, I don't know. Comment no kings in America. No kings in America. Thank you very much. And until next time, peace. I'm out. Clear talk. Yeah, clear talk. I'm out.